We're going to talk about the fact that Brexit, the NHS and education look set to dominate the SNPs' annual conference in Glasgow this week. But perhaps surprisingly, a formal debate on a second independence referendum isn't on the schedule.
Could this be due to a disappointing general election campaign in which the SNP lost almost a third of its Westminster seats?
Well, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, joins us now from Glasgow. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. I think this is the first time we've spoken to you since the general election. So perhaps we could start sort of broadly by talking about the popularity of Jeremy Corbyn, the sort of rising profile of Ruth Davidson and the success that the Conservatives have been enjoying in Scotland. Do you think, with that in mind, that 2015, that general election result, is almost as good as it's going to get for the SNP?
Well, the 2015 general election result happened just after the Scottish referendum. It was an exceptional result in exceptional circumstances. But let me put things into context. You know, the most recent opinion poll in Scotland has the SNP 17 points ahead of our nearest rivals, so way out in front of either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. The Conservatives have actually slipped back into third place in the polls in Scotland, having come second in the last two elections. And in a Westminster sense, you know, yes, the 2015 result was exceptional, but let's look at our performance in the broad sweep. When I became SNP leader just under 3 years ago, the SNP had 6 MPs in the House of Commons. Today we've got 35 MPs in the House of Commons. So by any measure, the SNP is in a very strong position. But of course, we've been in government for 10 years, and the responsibility I have and we have as a party overall is to make sure that we continue to move the country forward, taking the right decisions to support our economy and our public services so that we are building up those public services for those who depend on them.
You mentioned the latest poll. There was a YouGov poll over the weekend that said that 42% of Scottish voters were disapproving of the SNP's record so far. On that particular issue, I mean, one of the things you have been accused of is, since the last general election, is sort of talking so much about independence, that neglecting things like particularly education and health. Do you see that as a sort of fair assessment? How would you defend yourself on that one?
I don't think it's fair. I mean, I can understand why some people would say that, but I don't think the evidence stacks that up. I mean, take health, for example. Our health service, like health services across the developed world, faces the challenge of an ageing population. So we are investing £3 billion more under the SNP in the health service, 12,000 more people working in it. We've taken a big step in reforming health and social care to make it fit for the future. And right now, our emergency departments, accident and emergency departments, are the best performing in the UK by some considerable distance. In education, I've said very clearly we've got work to do to close the attainment gap. But, you know, here in Glasgow, the city I'm in this morning, 10 years ago when we took office, 12% of young people left school with 3 hires, our equivalent of A-levels. Today, that number is 30% and rising. We have a record number of young people going to university, including a record number of young people from our most deprived communities. So we've got challenges, like governments everywhere have challenges. We've got work to do. But our record over these past 10 years is a good one. You know, we've got unemployment that's lower than in any other nation in the UK, under 4%. Employment is at a record high. So across all of these issues, I think it's fair to say our record is a strong one, but we now want to build on it.
Of course, the issue that looms large for everyone at the moment is that of Brexit, and particularly for yourself and for Scottish voters, is how that might affect the issue of independence. Do you have a date in mind as to when you will address that issue again?
Well, we've got a mandate to give people a choice within this Scottish Parliament, but equally I have recognised, and this was clear to me during the general election, that with all of the uncertainty caused by Brexit, people aren't quite ready to set a date for making another big decision. So I've said I won't consider further the issue of timing or a date until we've got more clarity around Brexit. And, you know, later next year, hopefully, we will start to see some of that clarity emerge. So that's a time when we can look again at that issue in light of the circumstances at the time.
Can I ask
but of course, that doesn't mean we don't continue to make the case for Scotland being independent right now, because as we see the chaos that's engulfing the UK and this, you know, damaging Brexit that looms ahead of us, I think the case for Scotland being more in charge of our own future, more in charge of the decisions that shape that future, is growing stronger by the day.
On that issue, do you obviously you've been looking closely at what's been happening in Catalonia and Spain in the last few days and weeks. Does something like that influence the decisions that you are making?
No, Catalonia is not Scotland. Scotland is not Catalonia, and obviously all of us watch what's happening in Catalonia with interest. I think the scenes of violence we saw last Sunday were shocking and appalling and should be condemned by everyone, and I certainly hope now we see a process of dialogue in Catalonia to replace the confrontation that we've seen up until now, so that a way forward can be found that respects the rule of law, respects democracy, but also allows people in Catalonia to choose their own future. But the situation in Catalonia and the situation in Scotland, of course, are different. We're two different countries, and different circumstances will determine our futures.
And to just return to Brexit as well, I mean, Mrs May says she'll sit down with you to discuss how the UK gets the best deal out of Brexit in the future. Do you think that when that comes around that she'll still be Prime Minister? She'll be the person having those discussions with you?
I don't know is the honest answer to that. I work on the basis that she will be, but that's not something I am in control of. Theresa May clearly has weakened authority, and she is presiding over a deeply divided party on the issue of Brexit, and no doubt on other issues as well. And that's a problem for the Conservative Party, but it's a much bigger problem for the country. So I want to see greater clarity around the Brexit negotiations. My view is, yes, the UK is leaving the EU. I regret that, but I accept it. But we should stay in the single market and the customs union because that's the best way to protect jobs and living standards and livelihoods. And nobody, I believe, voted to leave the EU in order to see the country get poorer. So I hope common sense starts to come to the fore in these negotiations, whether that's Theresa May or anybody else leading the Conservative Party. Perhaps the most worrying thing just now is that even if Theresa May wasn't Prime Minister, who would be Prime Minister in her place? I'm not sure anybody relishes the prospect, certainly not in Scotland, of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister.
Who do you think will be in a job longer, Theresa May or Gordon Strachan?
I've just been asked that question on another channel, and I think I managed to dodge it there, so I'll try and do the same here. I'm a big fan of Gordon Strachan. I have been since the days he used to play for Scotland. Being Scotland manager is a really tough job with perhaps even more responsibility on the shoulders than a First Minister or a Prime Minister, such as the importance of football to the nation. Last night's result was really, really disappointing, but, people in Scotland will continue to love their football, and Gordon's future as manager is a matter for him to decide. But I think probably if I had to make a decision, I'd back Gordon Strachan over Theresa May.
OK, right, we'll watch that one closely. Thank you very much, Nicola Sturgeon. Thank you very much. That's a quote, isn't it, to take us into the sport where we're looking at.